Everyone. Oh, wait. Okay. Hi, everyone. Good evening or whatever time zone you're in, but it's nice to see you all here. My name is Dr. Mehrnaz Mirhosseini, and I'll be giving a talk about how to understand our anger. And here is joined with me my colleague, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Danny Lefkowitz, and I'm here just to provide some extra support for Murnaz this evening. And I'll be presenting on a topic about anxiety on Wednesday. Hope to see you there.
Mhm. And then as I give this presentation today, feel free to jump in with any questions in the chat. We'll have Danny and Chantal checking the chat and all that, so feel free. And I will share my screen now. Let's see if this works. Okay, I'm just gonna make it bigger. Is that good? Okay. Go back to the first page. Yep. So today we'll be talking about anger. And just a brief introduction. I did my PsyD in clinical psychology at Long Island University Post. I did my undergrad at University of Minnesota. I've had a variety of different experiences in different settings clinically, such as community mental health, private hospital, school, and private practice. And outside of work, I really love being active, doing yoga, traveling, baking, and music. So tonight we will be talking about anger. We'll start with some education about it, and then as well as talking about some skills in how to approach anger, and then we'll also discuss next steps. So, the ultimate goal for tonight is to really take home this message that anger isn't a problem that you have to get rid of, but rather it's a human emotion that really deserves a lot of understanding. Many people have complicated relationships with anger. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. Anger can be scary, and some people might not even recognize it. So, again, today the goal is to not to tell you to stop being angry, but instead really exploring what anger is, what it might be trying to communicate, and how to respond to it in ways that are helpful rather than harmful. So, tonight, as we go through the slides, I really encourage you all to think about your own experiences and really just noticing what resonates with you. So, what is anger? Anger is a normal human emotion. And I'd like to start with a question. You can reflect uh, by yourself. You can feel free to type in the chat, but no need to do that. But when you hear the word anger, what comes to mind? Many people think of yelling, fighting, becoming aggressive. I'll let you just take a second to think about what it is that comes up for you when you think about anger. I see there's something in the chat. Um, I see heat, scary, loud, hot, explosive. Perfect. These are all very normal reactions or experiences that we have towards anger. So thank you for sharing. So anger does show up in many different ways. As we saw in the chat, people wrote different things. Sometimes we express it outwardly by raising our voices or arguing, or sometimes people express anger inwardly through self-blame, self-criticism, or even depression. So there's different responses that we have towards anger, and there's no um, right or wrong answer as to which one of these resonate with you. It's really just an opportunity right now to take a second to become a little bit aware of how anger shows up currently in our life. And I'll say this multiple times throughout tonight's presentation, but really the first step towards change is awareness. So before we talk about managing anger, I also want to continue normalizing it. Just a little bit of context, this might not apply to everyone, but um, sometimes trauma can be really prevalent in relation to anger. Many people who have experienced trauma believe that there might be something wrong with them because they feel angry, or they might question, like, why am I still so upset? Or this should be over by now. But the reality is that if you have been through something painful or frightening or traumatic, anger is really completely a normal response. You might feel angry at people that have hurt you, or maybe at people that didn't protect you, and so on and so forth. Really, just coming back to this idea that your anger is valid. So, in trauma recovery specifically, the goal is not to eliminate anger. It's really just to understand it and use it as information. And I actually like to use this as a lens towards all types of anger, regardless of if you have experienced a trauma or not. Um, so now we're going to go to the next slide, and I like this diagram in the next slide because it's a way to think about anger moving forward. So one of the most useful ways to understand anger is through this iceberg metaphor. When we look at an iceberg, only a small portion is visible above the water. So what we can see from the surface is it can be misleading because most of the iceberg is hidden below the water. So maybe we can take just a second to look at this diagram and look at all the different words. There's could be a lot more words as well that fit underneath the iceberg. And basically, anger works the same way. When people experience anger, or when they think of anger, they usually see what's on top, which is the frustration, yelling, shutting down, or even withdrawing. But underneath the anger, emotions exist that could be more vulnerable. These emotions might include sadness, grief, fear, loneliness, rejection, hurt, and and a lot more. And so, for many people, anger can feel safer than experiencing these emotions underneath the iceberg, such as vulnerability. It can be a lot easier to say, I'm angry, than to say, I'm hurt, or I'm scared, or I feel rejected. So, when anger shows up, one question I really encourage people to ask themselves is what else might be happening underneath this emotion, or what else is behind this anger? So, again, one of the biggest misconceptions about anger is that anger itself is bad. And I want to really emphasize that anger, again, is not inherently bad or wrong. Rather, it's information. And the real question is not whether we feel angry, it's what we do with the anger. So there's these two types, constructive and destructive. Constructive anger can help us identify problems, can set boundaries, advocate for ourselves, and really motivate us for change. Whereas destructive anger might lead us to hurt ourselves, hurt others, damage relationships, become bitter, isolate ourselves, or even remain stuck. So again, it's not the emotion that's the problem, but it's our response that can be damaging and it could potentially be harmful. And so hopefully with today's presentation, we can learn ways to approach anger in a more constructive way. So just looking more closely at the difference of constructive anger versus destructive. Constructive anger tends to remain within a manageable range. If you rate anger on a scale of 0 to 10, we feel it up to about a 5 out of 10. So it doesn't completely take over. It doesn't necessarily mean it feels good, but it just means that it's at a manageable state. We can also call this a safe zone for anger. With constructive anger, we continue to remain aware of what we're feeling. We can become curious about it, and we can also use it to better understand ourselves and communicate our needs. I also like to think of constructive anger as respecting both our needs and the needs of other people. It can be more action oriented and solution focused and really seeks that understanding aspect rather than punishment. So destructive anger looks a little different. It tends to be more intense and impulsive, and it really takes us out of that safe zone. So it will, I'll kind of look at it as above a 5 on that 0 to 10 scale. Sometimes destructive anger can be explosive, and other times, as mentioned before, it can show up more undercover, as in resentment or bitterness or self-criticism. And one thing I sometimes tell people is that there are many people who never yell, but still struggle with destructive anger because maybe that anger is actually directed inward. So destructive anger doesn't always have to look like that outward explosive. It could also be more subtle. For example, it could be that harshness towards ourselves. So again, the goal isn't to suppress our anger, but rather it's to bring it back into that manageable range in that safe zone so that it can be useful and we can use it to our benefit and to our learning. This is a little bit more on the differences of destructive anger and constructive. So this table, and I have another one after this that describes common mindsets that either fuel anger or maybe help regulate it. For example, if we believe that if I yell loud enough, people will listen, we're more likely to use anger in an aggressive way. But when we realize that maybe a calm and assertive communication approach can be more effective, there could be a whole range of new choices that become available. Similarly, many people also believe that they should never feel angry. And again, this leads to the belief or this action that people tend to suppress their anger until it eventually explodes. But healthy anger really allows room for both of these concepts. The first one being, I have a right to feel angry, which is the second to last row. And also, I am responsible for how I express them. So I'll leave a few, maybe like 30 seconds for you to look through these examples and maybe notice which beliefs sound familiar to you. Some of these might apply, some of these might not. Um, Again, anger looks very different for each and every one of us. I'll leave it up for another 5 seconds and then I'll show the next table with more. Okay. And these are a few more. I think it's also important to note that there can be lots of components that go into these perspectives that people develop, and we'll kind of get into that in the next slide. I'll leave this up for a few more seconds. Okay. So before we change our anger, again, it's important to understand it because our relationship with anger didn't develop all of a sudden. Some of these questions I have on this slide are meant to help guide us to explore where our anger style comes from. Most of us may have learned about anger from our families, communities, cultural differences, and also early life experiences. So I encourage you to even either in your head or if you want to write down for yourself. You don't have to put it in the chat, but you're always welcome to. Think about your childhood. How was anger expressed in your home? Was it explosive? Was it ignored? Maybe punished? Or did you see healthy examples of people expressing anger respectively and constructively? Sometimes people realize that they are themselves repeating patterns that they may have learned decades ago. So, and the goal of this isn't to blame, it's really just awareness. So, really just understanding where the pattern came from, because then we can decide what we want to do with it. If any of you really enjoy journaling, maybe it's even taking one of these questions and later on writing it down and seeing what comes to mind. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide. So part of the understanding anger is really learning how to recognize the signs of anger. This can be a really powerful skill because most anger doesn't necessarily appear out of nowhere. We get these warning signs. Some are physical, some are emotional, and sometimes there are also these mental cues as well. So, for example, some physical cues are feeling overheated. I remember the word heat in the chat, or we get clenched fists, our heart starts racing, or we get really quiet. This is not going to be an exhaustive list, but just some examples on the slide. Feel free to, as I go through these, maybe some other examples pop up for you that feel true for you. There's also emotional cues such as feeling frustrated, getting annoyed, irritated, and stressed. And then we also have these cognitive cues. So maybe we notice that our thoughts are becoming more rigid or judgmental. We might have thoughts like, that's unfair, they're ridiculing me, they don't respect me, things like that. So taking a moment to think for yourself, what do those cues look like? What would your physical cues be, your emotional cues, and maybe even those thought cues? And I just want to emphasize doing so without any type of judgment. These are just, you know, reactions that we have to an emotion, just as we do with maybe anxiety or excitement or sadness. Oftentimes, anger has a lot of stigma. Along with the signs of anger, there's also triggers, and triggers are situations that activate anger more quickly than others. So these are just some examples of potential triggers. You can also take a moment to think about what might be yours if they're on this page or they're not. So some examples are disrespect. Sometimes it's dishonesty. For others, it might be feeling controlled, ignored, or treated unfairly. Back to that trauma context as well. Maybe for trauma survivors, they might notice that certain reminders of past experiences can trigger these intense emotional reactions as well. So I really encourage you to think about your top three triggers, not because they're something to necessarily avoid, but at least understanding them can help you prepare. And when we know our triggers, we're less likely to get caught off guard from them. Okay, so up until now, we've kind of been talking about what anger is, where it comes from, and how it shows up. And the next step is really understanding how the anger actually unfolds. So these two diagrams, the first one kind of just shows like that biological arousal cycle of anger, and the one next to it is that diagram on a scale of 1 to 10 with the intensity, and I like how the colors really show that. So with these two pictures, one of the reasons that people might feel stuck with anger is because they're often experiencing it as something that suddenly happens to them. So it catches them off guard. Maybe you might resonate with this idea that like I just snapped in the moment or I don't know what came over me. But when we look more closely, anger is rarely a single event because most of the time it might even follow a cycle. So typically that process begins with the trigger, like it says in this first picture. And once the trigger occurs, our thoughts begin to try and make sense of what happened. We might find ourselves thinking, like having those thought cues. And then those increase in thoughts can also build the emotional intensity of the situation and really reinforce our perception that we've been wronged. And as those thoughts build, our bodies begin responding, our heart rate increases, our muscles tighten. We might feel those physical reactions like feeling hot and shaky and restless and tense. And that's really our nervous system preparing us for action. We're kind of going into that fight or flight mode. And as that emotional experience becomes stronger, what may have been initially maybe like annoyance or frustration can turn into something stronger, like rage or just intense anger. So the stronger the emotion becomes, the more likely we are to move into those behaviors. After the behavior, if it is a more destructive behavior, then comes the consequence. Um, and what that looks like could be different for everyone, but just some examples is maybe a relationship gets strained, or maybe we feel guilty or ashamed or embarrassed. Maybe the original problem or whatever the situation was remains unresolved. And kind of unfortunately, those consequences might even create new emotional pain where that might even become a new trigger, and then the cycle starts again. And the good news is, with all cycles, there's a way to break them. And that we don't necessarily have to control every step of this process. We only need to interrupt one part of the cycle. So if we can recognize a trigger or challenge a thought or notice what's happening in our body or even pause before reacting, we can really create a wide range of opportunities for different outcomes. So getting back to this idea of understanding the anger cycle, um, because it can really give us back that choice and control. So before we get into the skill, which is interrupting one part of this anger cycle, what I'm going to focus on today is the noticing what's happening in our body and pausing before we're reacting. I was thinking we could do a quick body scan. You don't have to participate in it, but it's just going to be for like 2.5 minutes. I'll kind of guide us through it. And this will be like just a short check-in throughout this talk and also a great tool to have moving forward. And I'll share the link as well, just as a resource later that you can always use if you would like to. Um, so I'm just going to pull up the guided part and feel free to get comfy. You can close your eyes. You don't have to participate in this either. It'll, again, just be like 2.5 minutes. But this is really just good for us to practice how to ground in the moment and really recognize our body cues and what our body might be telling us and really just noticing. So when you feel ready, I'll guide us. So um, also feel free, Chantal and Danny, to participate if you want. And you can turn off your camera if that's more comfortable. So begin by bringing your attention into your body. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. You can notice your body seated, wherever you're seated. You can feel the weight of your body on the chair, on the floor, and start by taking a few deep breaths. And as you take a deep breath, bring in more oxygen and livening the body. And as you exhale, have a sense of relaxing more deeply. You can notice your feet on the floor. Notice the sensation of your feet touching the floor, the weight and pressure, vibration, heat. You can notice your legs against the chair, the pressure, pulsing, heaviness, lightness. Notice your back against the chair. Bring your attention into your stomach area. If your stomach is tense or tight, let it soften. Take a breath. Notice your hands. Are your hands tense or tight? See if you can allow them to soften. Notice your arms. Feel any sensations in your arms. Let your shoulders be soft. Notice your neck and throat. Let them be soft, relaxed. Soften your jaw. Let your face and facial muscles be soft. Then notice your whole body present. Take one more breath. Be aware of your whole body as best as you can. Take another breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Okay. Hopefully that was a nice little short break and you feel a bit more grounded if you weren't already. But I really like this tool. There's lots of free resources online to have really good mindfulness and grounding audios. This one I took was from UCLA Mindfulness. I'll post it in the chat after. There's also different apps you can use, like the Calm app, or even just doing a quick YouTube search with some videos. Okay, so now to get into the skills part, this is a really key strategy that can be helpful to transform anger from being destructive to more healing. And there's no like one title for the skill, but it's just called motivate, contain, and listen. And we'll go through each one. And they all work together. So the first one is motivate. Motivate means really searching inside within you for compelling reasons that you want to stop the destructive anger and reasons why you might want to handle anger more constructively. So this is all in the preparation and like the reflecting, kind of what we've been doing at the beginning. Some examples of this that might help you with motivate is observe the cost of your anger. What has it done? Has it isolated you? Has it kept you from feeling at peace? Has it hurt your job performance? Has it even left physical scars on your body? Just really taking a moment to observe what the cost is. The next one is observing the cost of suppressing your anger. Maybe it's kept you from advocating for yourself. Maybe it's led to passive aggressive behavior. Or maybe it's turned more inwards. Another idea is to get feedback about your anger. Hearing how others view your anger can also give you really important information. Sometimes becoming defensive or dismissing feedback will continue these feelings of keeping us stuck. And you might not necessarily have to agree with what others have to say, but I think it's important to listen carefully and then you kind of deciding what is true. Another idea is feeling the impact of the anger on your body. Sometimes people who get angry a lot are more likely to notice physical symptoms, such as high blood pressure. Do you notice the intense stress that maybe anger has put on your body? Maybe you feel the tension that it's created. Another one is noticing whom your anger has hurt, yourself, your friends, your partner, your children. Anger is scary and it can scare people, even if they can't tell you that. So maybe the motivate part is seeing the pain in other people. Another one is to develop a policy on anger, making a commitment to yourself that no matter what happens, you will not act destructively on your anger. And then another one, kind of you're already doing this now, is learning more about your anger. And this can be ultimately one of the best ways to motivate yourself. So I'm not suggesting that you do all of these, but maybe one really sticks out to you or a few. And I would just encourage you to lean into it and really explore that in a curious way. So after the motivate comes contain. And this is really applicable to the destructive anger because really, once the destructive anger has begun, the only goal that should be in the moment is to bring it back into the safe zone. So, again, that 0 to 5 on that scale. This is when you're aware of your anger and you're keeping it in that manageable level. So, when you're in an intense anger episode above a 5 on that scale, I wouldn't say it's the time to explore or understand in that moment. That will all come later. The only goal during this phase is to again bring it back into the safe zone. And the next slide will kind of go into some ideas. So these are just some ideas that might help you. You might have a few that come to mind as I'm going through this list, or maybe part of the next phase after this is to, in your own time, explore what could be some ideas that you implement to really contain in the moment. So some examples. The first one is delay, such as a timeout or thinking time. This might be one of the most effective strategies. And basically, it's no matter what, forcing yourself to delay any anger expression or action until you're back in the safe zone. And that could look like delaying for at least half an hour, whatever time, you know, you think could be feasible for you. But it has been found out that it takes around 20 to 30 minutes for your body to kind of feel back to normal if you are in that really high intense state. Another idea is to do soothing activities. Again, different for everyone, but some ideas listening to music, doing that body scan in that moment to kind of just take a moment between yourself and that anger and recognizing what it feels like. Maybe it's reading, maybe it's watching TV, maybe it's doing something physical. Again, different for everyone. Some other ideas is doing activities that help you feel in control. Some things that come to mind is cleaning, writing lists. Again, different for everyone. Another idea is notice what you're grateful for. Sometimes just taking a moment to um, really like lean into a different type of emotion can help diffuse that anger. Another one is asking for help. If you feel that your anger is at a unmanageable level, then that piece can be really important, and we'll kind of touch on that as well throughout the slide. Another one is to, if you're unaware of your anger in the moment, it says try to become conscious. So what that means is recognizing the anger signs and those physical cues. So even taking a step back and recognizing how does it show up in my body? What am I feeling right now? What are the thoughts that I'm having? Taking that extra step will help diffuse the anger. Sometimes this part is helpful, remembering the bottom line that it's not okay to act out destructively in anger. It's never okay to hurt someone physically. Unless, there's exceptions like self-defense, but you have a right to feel angry and trying to practice compassion towards yourself and others. And then this last one says stay humble. And what I mean by that is sometimes righteousness can fuel anger. And maybe the important step in this case would be really noticing that everyone makes mistakes in life. So again, thinking about what applies to you, and maybe there's some other ideas that happen for you as you're thinking through this list. And remembering that for the contain step, it's not about exploring or understanding. It's really just about things that we can do in the moment to bring ourselves back to that 0 to 5. And so now for after anger episodes, listen. Again, many people make the mistake of viewing anger as an enemy and something that we have to get rid of or eliminate. And instead, I really encourage you all to think of anger as a messenger. Even if we might not like the message, it's usually trying to tell us something important. And so these, again, are some ways that we might be able to explore that. The first one is listen to the most vulnerable sides of yourself. Sometimes destructive anger, this isn't going to be a blanket statement, but it can be like a small child throwing a tantrum. A child that's vulnerable, maybe they feel scared, alone, powerless, or guilty. So, an essential task of, in this case, recovery is to notice those feelings, respect them, and soothe yourself through them. Notice some patterns. Does your anger happen when you feel hurt or when you're tired or hungry? Maybe when others are incompetent or when you feel rejected. Thinking about what triggers you. Another way is to express your anger calmly. And what this means is sometimes after destructive anger episodes, maybe we ruptured a relationship and we want to repair that. So maybe it's brainstorming ways on how we can express that hurt or whatever the emotion must have been and communicate that. Sometimes it's using negotiation, praise, and teaching. And and what I mean by that is using that instead of the anger to encourage change in others, depending on what the trigger may have been. Um, Another one is to protect yourself from angry influences. So observe how you're affected by other triggers in the world, or maybe other influences like violent movies, watching the news, or being around angry people. Um, I just realized I skipped the one above. It's notice why you did what you did. So again, seeking that understanding. Now that you're in this listen phase of the anger rather than in the moment, you can really use the time to seek understanding, not blame yourself, not blame anyone else, and really just being compassionate with yourself. And this way it can help you take responsibility for your actions and move forward. Another one is notice how anger gets misdirected. Sometimes it gets directed at people who don't deserve it or who might not deserve it so intensely. And even just noticing that can be really powerful. And then the last two, apologizing to people who you've hurt with anger. This doesn't necessarily take away, but it can help. And if you want to, you can always try and explain the painful feelings that drove your anger. Again, it's very dependent on the situation. And then this last one, sometimes recognizing that you might need to mourn things that you can't change. Sometimes there might be needs that you can't ever have fulfilled or you might not have fulfilled. Maybe you have a medical illness that won't go away, or maybe you're in a situation that can't change. And maybe part of that is mourning that and moving towards the acceptance piece. So I'll go back to this. So those were the motivate, contain, and listen steps. Um, Before I move on to towards wrapping up, do I have any questions? I see something in the chat. Okay, thank you, Yasmin, for sharing. Definitely news is a trigger. So definitely relate to that. So thank you for sharing. So this is just there's so many resources, but I like to put in this here because it's a free app from the VA. And if you're interested in exploring your anger more, they kind of give you modules to go through, and you can have an anger log, and they have more tools on the app. So just a resource out there. It's called AIMS, Anger and Irritability Management Skills app. Okay. So, as I begin to wrap up today, I also want to leave you all with this idea that I really like, that I find to be really simple, but also really powerful. So, there's these two words here, reactive and creative. And you'll notice that they contain almost exactly the same letters, um, but just reorganized. And I find this to be really powerful because when we're reactive, we're operating from these automatic patterns or maybe even impulsivity. And maybe those reactions were things that we learned for a reason. So again, it's not blaming ourselves for being reactive, it's just recognizing that these are automatic responses that might no longer be serving us. On the other hand, being creative means something different. It means creating a space between what happens and how we respond. It means recognizing that maybe we might not be able to control every situation, but we do have some influence over the choices that we make next. So the quote on this slide speaks to this idea that creativity is something that all of us possess. Every time that we choose awareness instead of autopilot, or every time that we pause before reacting, or every time we respond in a way that aligns more with our values rather than our impulses, we're creating something new. And we're creating a different outcome instead of maybe one that's in alignment with our old patterns. Um, so I'll kind of leave you with this idea that the next time anger shows up, do you want to react from an old pattern or do you want to create a new response? Okay. So one more thing I have a few more slides, but one thing that also I just want to emphasize again is, we've talked about different things with anger, ranging from noticing triggers, recognizing physical cues, identifying these patterns, maybe skills that we could implement in the moment when we're feeling really intense anger. All of these skills ultimately will help us move from reacting automatically and responding in a more intentional way. And they will take practice. It's not going to be easy, but if you find that you really do want, have this motivation for change, then even just that is the first step. And I think that's equally as important. And these are just some ideas I have. You don't have to do these at all, but just some ideas if you want to practice or thinking about your anger more as you go into this evening or this coming week. Um, Different ways that we can kind of understand our anger. So maybe we write a script of what we might say to ourselves the next time we have an impulse to hurt ourselves or someone else, or maybe act in a destructive way. If you have a therapist, you can also work with them in that script or do it yourself. Another idea is imagine you're teaching anger to a child. What would you say? Maybe it's taking a situation you've had in the past where you've had destructive anger and rewriting it in a healthy way. Maybe it's exploring the resources like the AIMS app, or the UCLA mindfulness website or other things, which I'll put in the chat. Maybe it's discussing anger patterns with a friend or a therapist or a support group, or doing that self-reflection from those ideas that we kind of discussed above or in previous slides. So just some ideas for practice. And then I think it's also important to talk about some next steps. Um, Sometimes therapy can be helpful when anger is really persistent and it's hard to control, or we just need that extra support and help. And there can be different pathways to access this. I would encourage you to um, talk to your PCP or maybe looking through your health insurance. There's also this website here that you can use. Um, and so there's different ideas. And if, as a reminder, if you ever feel like you're in an emergency um, or a crisis, I would encourage you to call or text 988, which is the mental health line, or 911, or go to the ER for an emergency. And then just some final thoughts again, um, is that anger is a normal human emotion. It serves as a protection for us for more vulnerable feelings. It can be constructive or destructive. Even having a simple moment of awareness, maybe if it's even just one thing from today, that can be really powerful. And the main skill to help manage our anger is that containment, where we create those small breaks or small pause. And then the healing can happen when we listen to our anger and what it's trying to tell us instead of trying to get rid of it. So, one question that I encourage you all to leave with is, what is one thing that your anger may be trying to teach you or tell you? So, just something to think about. And that is the end of my presentation. So, thank you all so much for listening. And I welcome any questions or comments or feedback. And I will post the link to that mindfulness thing in the chat. So,
Thank you, Mehrnaz. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, you should be able to unmute yourselves now and ask. Or if you want to type them in the chat box, you can go ahead and do that as well. Um, yeah. Yeah, I really appreciated that you also had us break and do the body scan. Um, the pausing is so important, but I also I myself also struggle with like befriending my anger. There's like a level of sh shame that I have associated to anger, like it's bad. So I also appreciate like the invitation to um yeah, like that very last question, like what is my anger trying to teach me? What is it trying to say? Because it's likely coming up for a reason, right? There's something to pay attention to there, and to just sort of like push it away with shame isn't like a long lasting strategy to actually get anger to go away. Like it serves a purpose. So I really appreciate the different ways that you, yeah, talked about it and shared tools. So thank you. And it looks like you dropped in the guided meditation. Awesome. And Yasmin wrote, small pauses can prevent big regrets. Immensely helpful. I recently decided that the next time I become angry, I'll take a breath, pause, pose a question either to myself or to the other party about the situation, which creates space between the desire to explode versus respond. Yes, totally agree with that there.
I
Brooke
love that.
says this was very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy you found it helpful and um, definitely take advantage of the resources online and even just thinking about it and writing it down and asking ourselves these things is again just an important first step and can be really powerful. So yeah, thank you all
Yeah.
for listening.
Yeah. Okay, so just a little reminder too that when I close out the meeting, you should be redirected to another like pop-out window that has a couple questions. So as participants, we really value you taking the time to answer the questions on our surveys. They're just helpful being a small nonprofit. And we appreciate your time and being here. Um, Everybody who joined, you very likely got the reminder email to be here. So if you'd like to support our work and believe that access to health and wellness is a human right and everybody deserves access, and you want to support our work monetarily, I left the donation link in the email signature that had the link to Zoom. So you can find it there. And otherwise, if monetary support is out of your means, like sharing by word of mouth, that things that we're offering, if you found it helpful, spread the word when I send the email link out, or sorry, the YouTube link out for this recording, and you want to share it with others that you think could benefit. That's also immensely helpful, and we are so, so grateful for our presenters and just people showing up and yeah, being in community and learning and sharing together. So thank you both, Mehrnaz and Danny. And don't forget, Danny's also going to be back with us on Wednesday, giving a presentation on anxiety. So all right. Hope to see you all in a few more days and be well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
You.
That
Good
was
night.
fabulous.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.